Joining me now is former policy coordinator to the presidential campaigns of Governor Mike Huckabee and Donald Trump, Pratik Chougule. Pratik, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Pratik, let's get right to my question of the day here. You heard my introduction. Donald Trump now up in the polls by 2 points over Hillary Clinton. This is just shortly after, just less than 2 weeks actually, after Hillary Clinton did her alt-right racism speech here. So let me just ask you, in your opinion, did that attack on Donald Trump, trying to associate him with this alt-right movement, did that backfire for her?
I'm not sure that it had much of a short-term effect. What I do think it had was the effect of giving the alt-right the sort of advertisement and credibility and legitimacy that it never could have garnered on its own. If you look at Google searches of the alt-right, they absolutely skyrocketed after Hillary Clinton's remarks, and they became a part of the debate and the national discussion in a way that simply would not have happened otherwise.
Right. And I think that's what people have been saying. So tell me a little bit about this alt-right movement, because I think the majority of Americans hadn't even heard about it until Hillary Clinton started talking about it. Certainly, they weren't relevant to the debate on a national level. Hillary Clinton says they're a loose movement. They exist mostly online. Who are they? Are they racist?
Well, it's absolutely correct that they've had nothing to do with the Trump campaign or the Huckabee campaign or presumably any other mainstream Republican organization. I had barely heard of the term before Hillary Clinton's speech. I had never heard of the term in my professional capacities in any way. To call it even a movement, I think, is a stretch. The alt-right is more or less a group of intellectuals who congregate primarily online and debate obscure theories and offer various critiques of conservatism online on blogs that very few people are even familiar with, much less read and digest.
Right. So again, like I said before, not relevant regardless who they are, and very hard to identify a shadowy organization or movement like that. Now, getting to the specifics of Hillary's speech, and this is where I think it got more interesting. Hillary Clinton said Trump's entire campaign, and you can speak to this personally, having been associated with it. Hillary said Trump's campaign is built on prejudice, but in my opinion, this is where her speech backfired, because I think it's pretty clear to the everyday American that Donald Trump's campaign is not built on prejudice. We can all agree that he says things that are indelicate sometimes, that he needs to clarify, or even things that he shouldn't be saying, but the entirety of his campaign is not built on prejudice. But what Hillary's comments did is they brought racial issues to the forefront. They started this conversation about racial divide, racial tension, and how that's going to be addressed through the policies of not only Trump, but comparing that to Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, it's a long-standing trope of the left, which Hillary repeated, that when you disagree with your opponents, you call them a racist or a bigot. Now, the irony is that the alt-right actually does, in fact, have bigoted and racist strands to it. It's certainly not a homogenous movement, and I wouldn't make a blanket statement about the alt-right, but there are certainly elements of the movement that cross the line. But when Hillary Clinton continuously calls anyone that she disagrees with a racist or a bigot, and when the left-wing movement, the liberal movement generally, does the same, ironically enough, they end up legitimating the very people who they fear most by crying wolf one too many times.
Right, and like I said before, I think it brings up this conversation. It brings up the question of what is Donald Trump going to do for minority communities versus what will Hillary Clinton do here? And Trump is at somewhat of a disadvantage here in the sense that he hasn't held public office before. We can't look at his record in the past and determine how or predict how he will behave as president based off of his past actions. But we can do that for Hillary. We can look at what she's done for minority communities in the past, and that's an accurate indicator of what she will do in the future. And Pratik, it doesn't seem to me that she's done a whole lot in her decades of service for the minority communities in our country.
Right, and I think by bringing up these irrelevant issues like the alt-right, rather than having a serious substantive debate on the economy, which I think most Americans want, it's really a distraction, and it begs the question, does she have a record that she's ready to defend?
Right, and I would go ahead and say the answer to that is no. I mean, she's not even talking about the violent crime rate, black-on-black crime. She's not talking about unemployment. She's not talking about the number of people below the poverty line, or the number of people on food stamps or welfare, or the number of people who are able to go to college. She's not talking about that big picture of all the little things we think of when we think of the economy as a whole. She's essentially race baiting.
That's exactly what she's doing, and she's trying to tarnish the Trump campaign through guilt by association. There's no question that there are elements of the alt-right that are not flattering, that are supporting Donald Trump, but that's very different than arguing that the Trump campaign is in any way taking guidance from this community. It's simply not the case.
Right, and that's true on both counts. That's where I think the media has done a disservice. Hillary Clinton, of course, directing the media in the sense that there's always going to be a small percentage of people who you don't want associated with your campaign or whose vote you don't want, who are going to vote for you anyway, and you cannot be held responsible for that because you're not in control of who votes for you. Hillary Clinton claims these white supremacists are supporting Donald Trump. Well, there are members of the KKK that are supporting Hillary Clinton, and I don't think, even as someone who opposes Hillary Clinton, I don't think I would associate her directly with those people. It's simply not her fault who votes for her in that sense. Pratik, before we go, because we're running out of time, let me ask you, this poll, the CNN poll, 45% Trump, 43% Hillary Clinton, what's causing this poll bounce for Trump?
Well, it's unclear. I think the dip that the Trump campaign suffered in August was bound to rebound at some point. It was an artificial dip caused by a combination of the natural bounce that the Democrats got after the convention and then a string of unforced errors by the Trump campaign. My sense is that the polls will probably remain tight going forward. The question is whether the Trump campaign can start to build a lead in some of the swing states where they've continually lagged behind, and I think that's the real open question.
Right, and that is the thing about the CNN poll. It shows Trump is still trailing Hillary Clinton in Pennsylvania and Ohio at least. Pratik, we're out of time, but thank you so much for being here. It was great to talk to you. All right, guys, let us know what you think. Tweet me at Liz_Wheeler. Share your thoughts, and we'll be back in 1 minute.